apparently recording has started. So you're very welcome to our topic 2, imagining an abolitionist future beyond reform. This is our second in our series of Beyond Carceral Feminism. I'm going to go ahead and put that back. Can everyone see me okay? Yeah, sort of.
Yes, but your PowerPoint is gone.
Yes, the PowerPoint's gone. That's fine. I'll bring it back. Don't worry. Basically what we're doing today is kind of a follow-up to the last one where we kind of had some making a case for why we need abolition and some kind of really preliminary kind of thinking about abolition. And today is more a broader view of abolition based on sort of what came out of the last one and also some of the feedback that people sent from the last time. So I wrote some things at about 3 a.m. So I'll go through and read those and then kind of drill down into each of those points. And then we'll do breakout sessions, so you won't be listening to me the whole time. My name's Emily. I'm in MERJ, I should say that. I have been doing prison abolition for a very, very long time, over 20 years. And so this moment is really exciting because, 10 years ago in Ireland, no one was talking about it. 5 years ago in Ireland, very few people were talking about abolition. And now there's like this resurgence of interest in abolition. So we're really excited to have this opportunity and have all of y'all with us on our journey towards abolition. I worked in the States on abolition through a couple of different organizations, but I was on the national organizing body for critical resistance in 2000, 2001, something like that. So I have had a long journey to abolition. And just to say that it is a journey and that none of us are fully formed. We don't, get birthed into abolition fully formed. I went from, very much sort of reformist to kind of like no more prisons to kind of full abolition over the course of years. So don't feel like, oh, I can't understand any of it, so fuck it, I'm just not going to do it. Like it's a process to get there, and we'll get there together. So this is kind of what I started thinking about after the last session. So the system isn't broken. The system is working exactly as it's meant to protect racial capital and the ruling classes. As long as we keep saying the system is broken, we'll look upon it as something to be fixed, which is reform, which is not abolition. So this is why we need to be able to articulate what a world without prisons and police looks like so that we can start at that, right? We can start with our eye towards that and kind of keep going towards that so we can know where we're going. Because if we don't know where we're going, then we're likely to stop at reform because some reforms seem radical. But again, they're not abolition. There are reforms that might be on the road, that are on the road to abolition, but we can't mistake them for our end goal. We can't talk about abolition without the ending of racial capitalism. They go hand in hand. We also need to divest ourselves from this notion of the justice system and unlearn all of our ideas about what it means to be safe and protected and what the rule of law is. Who does it serve? What is a crime? Who is a criminal? We need to divest ourselves from the concept of a level playing field and fairness when we start to think about what justice looks like, what real transformative justice looks like. Sometimes when we think about what a world without prisons looks like, we get caught up in what is possible. But this is largely based upon the idea of capitalism being inevitable. But we know it's not. It's a matter of political will rather than human capacity. Like, for example, like just look at what happened, during the last few months of the pandemic. Something as small in scale as the rent increase freeze. Was told, like we were told during the election, that that was impossible. It was illegal. We couldn't do that when Sinn Féin proposed it. And yet those same people introduced it. So we need to remember that there's a difference between impossible and political will. So we need to be always looking beyond and expanding things all the way out to their conclusion rather than stopping at the first hurdle. Right. So there's a difference between political will and human capacity. And so we need to expand our political imagination. And while we all sort of want answers because we feel really nervous and insecure, so we want these answers to like, well, so how do I respond to this specific scenario? Or what about rapists and murderers? That's always the one. But we need to do some big picture work first to create an abolitionist foundation for us to answer those questions, using this as kind of a framework, as a guide, rather than looking for very specific correct positions on things, right? So I hope that kind of makes sense. Right now, I'm going to go through some definitions. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this will work. Yay, I'm very proud of myself. Okay, so one piece of feedback was that we didn't really have a common language. So I'm going to go through a couple of terms that we might be using today so that we're all on the same page. Prison industrial complex. I don't know if y'all have heard of the military industrial complex. It's it's taken from that idea. But the prison industrial complex, or the PIC, a lot of people refer to it as the PIC. It's like in the States especially. It's used just to describe overlapping interests of government and industry that use surveillance, policing, and imprisonment as solutions to economic, social, and political problems. Through its reach and impact, the PIC helps and maintains the authority of people who get their power through racial, economic, and other privileges. There are many ways this power is collected and maintained through the prison industrial complex, including creating mass media images to keep alive stereotypes of people of color, travelers, poor people, queer people, immigrants, youth, and other oppressed communities as criminal, delinquent, or deviant. This power is also maintained by earning huge profits for private companies that deal with prisons and police forces, helping earn political gains for tough-on-crime politicians, increasing the influence of prison guard and police unions, and eliminating social and political dissent by oppressed communities that make demands for self-determination and reorganization of power. So I hope this is clear. Basically, it means that we're not just against private prisons. We're not just against, police. It's a whole system that feeds on itself. And is all interconnected. I think that sometimes, especially when we talk about, the abolition of direct provision, a lot of times we go to, corporations are making money off of human misery, which is true and it's fucked up, but there are state-run direct provision centers and they're just as egregious. So I think it's really important to know that it's not just, private prisons. It's not just, private surveillance companies. It's a collusion between the state and capitalism, really. So next, abolition. We kind of talked about what this is, but this is a more concise definition. Again, this definition is also by Critical Resistance. Prison industrial complex abolition is a political vision with the goal of eliminating imprisonment, policing, and surveillance, and creating lasting alternatives to punishment and imprisonment. From where we are now, sometimes we can't really imagine what abolition is going to look like. Abolition isn't just about getting rid of buildings full of cages. It's also about undoing the society we live in. This is very key, because the PIC both feeds on and maintains oppression and inequalities through punishment, violence, and controls millions of people. Because the PIC is not an isolated system, abolition is a broad strategy. An abolitionist vision means that we must build models today that can represent how we want to live in the future. It means developing practical strategies for taking small steps that move us towards making our dreams real and that lead us all to believe that things really could be different. It means living this vision in our daily life. Abolition is both a practical organizing tool and a long-term goal. That's really, really important. Okay. And then finally, racial capitalism. This comes up a lot. The process of deriving social and economic value from another person of a different racial identity, predominantly used to insinuate the derivation of value from a non-white or person of color identity. However, a person of any race might engage in racial capitalism, as might an institution dominated by one particular race. So basically, it's like how we value certain people and who profits off of the labor of those people by exploiting those people, because that's what capitalism means to exist, right? The elementary thesis of the concept is capitalism as an economic system subsists on the perpetual accumulation of capital and an increasing rate of said accumulation and capital can only accumulate by producing and moving through relations of severe inequality among human groups. Therefore, for capitalism to survive, it must exploit and prey upon the unequal differentiation of human value. And it's really important to know all capitalism is racial capitalism. Okay, we can come back to any of these terms. But now I kind of want to, let's see how we're doing on time. Yeah, we're grand. So I just want to go through some of the points that I've just been talking about a little bit and drill down into them. After this, we'll do some visioning work. Is that too grandiose? We'll do some breakout groups where we can start to think about these things a little bit further. But so the first point that we need to fully understand abolition in order to see our end goal, as I was saying. So I think that this is why we need to know what is abolition, right? What does that mean? And we're working towards a world without prisons and police. I think this last time we asked the question in the breakout groups, what would a world without prisons and police look like? And people had a really hard time answering this. Like it's really hard because we're so used to thinking about how our world is now, and thinking of it as inevitable, right? This is how we deal with things, and it's inevitable. But we really want to try and break that down a little bit. And again, people get stuck on kind of the nitty-gritty things like the rapists and murderers and specific legislation. But when you focus on that, it's hard to like zoom out and see the bigger picture. So what we want is to see the bigger picture and let that inform our decisions that we make about positions that we might take on those things, right? Instead of the other way around. So I think understanding abolition will help to clarify some of those specifics. One of the things, I think it was in one of the readings that we did, that I just finished all of them last night. So fair play to everyone who engaged with those. But yeah, Miriam Kaba says a big part of abolitionist project is unleashing people's imaginations while getting concrete. So that we have to imagine while we build, always both, right? So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to imagine so that we can start to build, right? So that we can know what we're building towards. So political imagination. Again, I think that we get stuck at this thing like, oh, it'll never happen. yeah, like a world without police would be nice, but like it'll never happen because capitalism is inevitable, right? But we have to stop thinking like that, because we think of these things as they've always existed, but actually they haven't always existed, right? I mean, even something as sort of acute as the COVID-19 measures, right? Um, 6 months ago, we would never have thought about, in the West anyway, wearing masks in public, right? That would have been seen as really bad, right? And yet now, at least some of us are doing that as a normal course of our day, right? So it is, these little things are possible, like they're, and the things that we think of as having always been haven't actually always been. We need to remember that we've gotten to there through a process of change, and that we can dictate that change. We just need the political imagination, and we need to recognize our own power, and to remember racial capitalism, it seems inevitable, it's not. That Ursula Le Guin quote, capitalism seems inevitable, but so did the divine right of kings. So let's remember that. Non-reformist reforms on the road to abolition, right? Non-reformist reforms seems like a ridiculous thing to say, but I think there was an infographic that was shared about like reformist reforms versus like the road to abolition. Like there are some things that are reformist reforms, and the problem with reformism is that you kind of stop, and then that becomes the new thing, and that becomes where we stop. Whereas like non-reformist reforms have an eye towards abolition. So like some reforms, loads of reforms are going to seem completely radical, right, compared to where we are now. But that doesn't mean that they're on the road to abolition. And we need to really always be thinking about this. So like, for example, we sort of touched on it last time, community policing. That seems like really radical, but what that ends up doing is like reinforcing policing and bolstering policing, or just policing, with people who maybe look like you, or, police accountability committees or whatever. Whereas like defund the police, that's still a reform, but it's a reform towards abolition, right? Defunding the police chips away at their power, so that's what we like eventually want. And just to say also, what we're working towards, I think hopefully like we can think more about this, but I think ultimately what we can agree on, that what we're looking towards is a world without violence and harm. But because we're human and there will be violence and harm, like a way to mitigate violence and harm and to address violence and harm that doesn't reproduce a cycle of violence and harm. Also, the thing about reformist reforms versus non-reformist reforms, it's really important that like as abolitionists, we listen to people on the inside, and we listen to people who are on the sharp end of police brutality. And, that includes people who are undocumented, that includes people who are criminalized for all different kinds of reasons. So we want to make people's lives better. And so we need to think about how we engage with that, right? So there are reforms that, again, are on the road to abolition that will not compromise your ultimate goal, and pushing for those reforms and supporting those reforms. So not undermining our own principles. And like a big one is, we need to be in solidarity. We can't be throwing people under the bus, and we need to make sure that when we make arguments, we are not throwing people under the bus, right? So it's not like, well, as long as, like, what about, nonviolent offenders? We'll keep the violent offenders locked away because, yeah, but nonviolent offenders, we can all agree that this, I think we don't make those arguments. We say no prisons, right? And we are, because there's all different reasons that people might use violence, including self-defense, but not limited to it, depending on where they come from and how vulnerable they are and their communities are. We can think about this. I don't know. I think a lot of people might have been engaged in the campaign to repeal the Eighth Amendment. So during that campaign, we really tried to push this idea that there's no good abortion versus bad abortion. Like some people deserve to have an abortion, but these people don't deserve to have an abortion, right? So because you don't want to undermine people, we said that everyone has a right to have an abortion regardless of what the circumstances are. Same here, everyone has a right to be free. Like, that's it. We need to divest ourselves from the prison industrial complex and capitalist notions of criminal justice and which is, like punishment systems of punishment. So this is really hard because we've never known anything different. Most of us haven't ever known anything different, right? We've been ingrained with you feel unsafe, you call the cops. And so it's like that. I'm kind of obsessed with panopticons, but it's like that panopticon, right? The police don't even need to be present for us to police ourselves because, we're just as terrified of the surveillance of the police as we are of the so-called, criminals. So yeah, this is one. Some people call it killing the cop inside you. I've seen a lot of graffiti recently about that. So yeah, really it's about seeing how invested we actually are and trying to get rid of some of that. And so this is really important. Abolition is not just about tearing down prisons, but building the world that we want to see. Again, a world without violence and harm, and a world where everyone has what they need. It's bigger than prisons, right? We have to start someplace, but we can't have a world without prisons and policing under racial capitalism, so we have to dismantle racial capitalism as well. And then this is really important to me. Abolition is a process, not a prescription. It's not like you do this, you do this, you do this. We're going to figure it out together. We have to do it together and figure it out together because we don't know the answers. Things will change. We can't just say, if you do this, you do this, you do this, that will be a world without harm. We all have to figure it out together, and we all have to contribute to that process. So I think I'm going to stop there. Hopefully that is making things a bit more clear. We're going to go into, actually I'm not going to yet. We're going to go into breakout groups. The first breakout group session, we're going to try and answer these questions. These questions were in the Google Doc that you were sent. So hopefully you've had some time to kind of think about them. Again, there's not like a right or wrong answer. It's more just like to start a discussion. You'll find that when we think about abolition, a lot of what we're doing, because there's no one specific way to do abolition, it's about asking ourselves questions and trying to figure out solutions, right? So what makes you feel unsafe and why? Can you think of a time you felt unsafe? You don't have to disclose this example, but just for your own self. Would the presence of police have made you feel safer? If no, why not? What would have made you feel safer? If yes, why? What was the specific service they provided that made you feel safe? Can you envision other people who could provide the same service? What would that look like? Also, we don't have to use the language of service. We can think about it in terms of mutual aid. I just was writing very quickly. And are there other things that would have helped? You can think of big things, including prevention, including anything, whether you think it's possible or not, right? So I think that We're going to break out into breakout groups. The questions will be in the chat. And the breakout groups won't be recorded. So I think here, I think you can go ahead and mute or unmute your audio and video if you'd like, and someone will put you in breakout groups. Is that right? Sorry, MERJ Island?
I'm currently putting people into breakout groups right now. So
Okay,
you should
cool.
be getting like a 10-second thing that will tell you you're going to breakout group blank. So I think I've sent everybody now.
Brilliant.
I will put you into one of the other groups. So because there's less people, we don't need that many groups, I think. But I will just check who else is here.
Cool.
Okay, so start.
On breakout groups?
Yeah, so it's just going to say now, it's just going to send you to your group.
Cool.
And I will send you to one, Emily. So I can send you to one now, or I can leave you here. What do you want?
Yeah, send me to one. Send me to one.
You should be. I don't know why. This is what happened last time, that it was like, yes, you're in a breakout room. There we go. Okay. Hello. Whoever is left with me. I need to change my light. Hi, Miriam and Kate. Okay, everybody's gone, I think. Maria and Kate. Are you still with me? Oh, you are not. Miriam is neither.
So I hope everyone had a really good discussion and a chance to talk a little bit and to think a little bit about safety and harm. So we're just gonna maybe take about 10 or so minutes to kind of report back from all the different groups. Do you remember which group you were in? I don't know. Maybe we can go through the facilitators, and if people want to add comments from that group, is that all right? So maybe the first facilitated group. So Nicole, do you want to go ahead and?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
So we got through kind of most of the questions sort of indirectly, one way or another, through the examples that people gave. And I thought it was really interesting that for the first question, anyways, that people had really different things for what made you feel unsafe. Because some people felt that people, depending on what they're doing, makes them feel unsafe. And then for people who live in more rural places, it's the city and being alone with those people, or the physical environment itself, the landscape itself, is dangerous or unsafe. One thing that came up was cis men specifically. So there's that. For some people, it's the lack of people then that makes them feel unsafe, or being alone. So they feel safer where there is more people, and like if it's late or dark, they feel safer where there's people and there's mutual surveillance. And yeah, so then we talked about like using an example of a time someone felt unsafe, and I said that we could just kind of talk about like a generic example if people don't want to disclose. And yeah, we talked about different instances, and one thing that did kind of, I think we were still trying to wrap it up, but someone mentioned that on public transport, sometimes it's hard to diffuse situations, and that they feel safer if like other people have tried to diffuse it already, and none of the kind of those efforts have been useful or helpful, that they do feel safer if security come on. And it's that sense of authority that deters people from, doing whatever they're doing. But I think it's important that we think about who the people are, and that if the people that were being, rowdy or whatever, if they weren't white and settled, then they mightn't have felt safer for the police to come in, or even if there was anyone else in that train or bus or whatever, they wouldn't have felt safer with security. And someone else brought up that they generally don't feel safer with the police, but they try to think of a situation where they did feel safe, and that was when they were in very immediate danger. But then when we tease out that idea, they were saying basically it's someone to deter the attack. So not necessarily police, but someone to witness and deter, or someone that's obliged to intervene when someone is unsafe, and they can remove them. And we kind of talked about how, that's really a big part of abolition, is about building that support, that we care for each other, so that we're all obliged to intervene and remove those people, whatever is needed to make people feel safe again. But we didn't really get to the specific services and those kind of things. But yeah, I thought it was a really good discussion.
Does anybody else want to add anything? Anybody in that group want to add anything? Okay, then can we go on to Yurika, to your group?
Hello?
Yay.
Yay. Hello. Yes, there was two main things and subheadings. So the two main things were sexual violence, harm and abuse. And then the second part of what we discussed was sort of place-based community and tenant organizing, and tenants feeling like they need to call the guards because they don't want to necessarily deal with the conflict themselves, or aren't able to. So under the first one of sexual violence and abuse, what made people feel unsafe was others around them not speaking up. They were alone in the harm, not knowing what to do, and not knowing what to do the right thing in that moment. And then after the harm was done, dealing with feelings of guilt and frustration and shame. No friends being around when the harm occurred. I think that's all that was what I've written down. Which is a difficult one to deal with. But I brought up that abolition is sort of you can use it in a preemptive measure, so that it is a set of practices that can be cultivated in a community that will stem violence ever happening or occurring. But it's difficult because we were talking about oftentimes when after harm occurs, the only thing that you do want is sort of recognition for the harm, and recognition by the abuser that harm has occurred, and that they are taking steps to sort of unlearn those behaviors, or taking steps to accept the harm that they've done. And prison obviously prevents that from ever happening. It removes the person who has committed harm from the community, so that the harm is never addressed and that the cycle continues. So yeah, I think it was important that it was really good that we began talking about possible ways and things that would have helped in that situation if the structures had been in place to help that. And then the tenant organizing, community-based organizing, sort of tenants' aversion to conflict is also a difficult one, but I think it was, maybe I won't drop names, but one of the participants was saying that it is about sort of fostering a culture of community care, and I hate to use the word empowering, but like empowering the community to have faith in their own capabilities of dealing with that conflict, and kind of recognizing that the police is never going to give you like resolutions to conflict. But yeah, there was the main two things that we spoke about. We did get through the points, but in again a very roundabout way, and probably could have been longer, our conversation. It was a really good chat anyway. But yeah, those are the two main things that we spoke about.
Cool. That's perfect. Is there anything else anyone wants to add in that group? Okay, well, let's move on to the next group then. Anto.
Yeah, here I am. Yeah, if I have to assign a title to our chat, it would be space. Like, for whatever reason, and without really agreeing this in advance, we were focusing on like the most common unsafe situation was the invasion of personal spaces from potential dangerous people. So somebody that enter your house or break into your car, or there was another episode that was focusing on somebody following somebody else with a car, so basically stalking. And pretty much in all of those situations, all the people involved agreed on the fact that even if, like, calling the police was a kind of automatic, let's say, like when you don't think anything better, like you do this because it is what it is supposed to do. But in the end, when police is there, the interesting thing that all the experiences we collect during our chat were basically the same, so they're not that much useful. Like in a case, they just send you a letter with general suggestions, or suggesting like psychological support, or in another situation somebody reported like basically I had to call the police because I need that for the insurance. Or in another situation, in the situation of the stalking, the response by the police was kind of shocking, because it was like, are you sure that was not flirting? So basically the patriarchy culture reproduced in the structures that are supposed to, protect you. And I think another very, very interesting remark was made by somebody telling, okay, you call the police, and what they do is act in a way that the people responsible will fear them. So basically what you do is, because they don't fear me enough, I will call somebody else that will scare them more than I can do. And everything, like all of this, is based on fear, not in conflict resolution, not in like solving the real situation. And another thing that was very, very interesting was like, because somebody broke into my place, I asked the neighbor to watch the camera they have. And not only was not solving the situation, but for the very first time, it was clear that this was something that you don't want to have, because basically the cameras, security cameras, were recording all your movements when you go out from your place, when you come in back. And so one of the suggestions were based on mutual aid from your neighbors, like a sort of mutual support in terms of watching the area. And another example made where the experience in Rojava made by the group of women responsible to make people accountable for sexual violence or domestic violence. And yeah, that was a very good chat.
Brilliant. We are running a little bit out of time, so I think there's a couple other ones. If we could just do it a little bit more quickly, just like main points, maybe that haven't been said already. I think, who else? Albert, were you facilitating?
No, I was not.
Sorry.
So Antonella, Eureka, Nicole, and Christina.
Okay. Christina, do you want to go, or do you want me to do it for the group?
So can people hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think the main points, I think people from the start didn't feel safer calling the cops in the situations they identified. And I think the conversation very quickly moved to creating a community and creating relationships and going to that as an alternative to policing that would make people feel safer. So we were talking about that, and you raised a very good point that we already kind of know how to create those systems, using the example of when you are afraid to walk alone at night and you bring someone with you. So it's just a matter of developing on things we already know, as opposed to thinking that a world without policing and a future where we could develop those communities is not possible. So yeah, I think that would be a very quick summary of the chat. I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
Yeah, I think that's right. It was about kind of like taking smaller scale examples of safety and how we deal with safety, and kind of like taking them to extrapolating them out to fit others. And I think there was a good example of like, neighborhood, like maybe an apartment block gets together and comes up with a protocol like for how to deal with domestic violence that happens within the apartment, and as like a collective. So I think so just kind of recapping what all of the other groups said as well is that it seemed like no matter what kind of situation, the safety issue always kind of there's an issue of violence, and people have different relationships to the guards, to the police, based on their precarity in a society, right? Like the example that maybe white people or middle class people or, settled people aren't afraid of the guards, or won't be treated a certain way by the guards, whereas other people will. So keeping that in mind all the time. And I think there's an insecurity that a lot of people feel that they don't know what to do because it's so ingrained that you don't feel safe, call the guards. And so really going back to knowing, trusting ourselves to know things, and also looking towards other communities that have the experience where they don't feel safe with the guards. What do they do? And maybe looking to those for examples. Like, we don't have to build everything from scratch. It's taking what we already know and kind of like sharing it with each other, so that we don't have to come up with solutions out of thin air. So yeah, I think that's great. I think a lot of people have a similar feeling about that, really wanting to respond with community networks rather than fighting fear with fear. Does that make sense? Okay, brilliant job. It's like we're all abolitionists. It's cool. So we're gonna kind of expand on that with a second set of breakout groups. Let me see if I can share my brain. Breakout group session 2. We'll take about 15 minutes, if that's okay with people, and answer these questions. This one is more about, so before it was about like, policing and safety and things, and this is more about like punishment and prisons. So 1, what do we want to get out of punishment? So what is the goal of punishment versus what do we want our world to be like? And how are those two kind of competing with each other? Does that make sense? Does punishment actually get us closer to what we want our world to be like? And if so, how? If not, why not? Like, are those two things compatible? Like, what is the point of punishment? I think we could think of. And when harm has happened, what will get us closer to what we want the world to look like? So essentially, we're taking these two ideas, what we want the world to look like, and punishment, and kind of interrogating them against each other. Does that make sense? So let's break out into groups again. Yay. I think that's happening now.
Yep, just give me 1 second.
Cool.
I think I still have a few people here. I'm just going to make sure that you guys get to go into a group.
Don't have very much time. So if everyone could do like a report back in 1 or 2 sentences, like can you get the gist of the questions about, basically the question was, is punishment compatible with the world we want to live in? I think the answer is no. But what came out of your group discussion? If we could just 1 or 2 sentences. Nicole, do you want to start?
Can I do 1 minute instead of 1 sentence?
Yes.
Okay, I'll start the timer. We all agreed that punishment is just short-term deterrence and trying to instill fear and keep the problem away, when we know that the problem is not an individual thing and it's a structural, systemic thing, and that we need to act in collective interest and we need accountability rather than just punitive, like look the problem away. And we all agreed that it doesn't build towards what we want. And towards the end, we talked about like when harm does occur, like what we can do a lot of times, even if it is a complete stranger doing the harm, we can look towards their community and see if we can find who they are and get to know what the issue is, in a non-carceral way. And we use the example of someone's wallet being stolen, and someone actually did know a person who found their wallet through completely kind of, unrelated to police, just kind of got the word out. So there's ways of doing things that aren't associated with the police, and just within the community and getting to know everyone.
Well done. Okay. Antonella, 1 minute.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, punishment is not the solution. It only perpetuates violence. We need to have clear in mind the intersection between race, class, gender, and what how the system used this to punish specific groups of people, and we need to build communities.
Perfect. Okay, next, Yurika.
Hi, thank you to all the participants. It was a really good chat. So we started off talking about revenge being like your initial feeling when harm has occurred. Like, oh, I want to hurt that person, like they've caused me harm. But maybe what's happening is like you want that person to understand what they've done to you. And then we started talking about how it's really hard to get out of that mindset, because from a young age we've been taught like reward versus punishment as a form of control. Our parents, slapped us on the butt when we did something bad, or like rewarded us for doing something good, like cleaning our rooms. And then we started talking about, somebody's capacity to be held accountable. For example, if a person's mentally unwell and they've caused harm, but then we've talked about how certain groups of people are criminalized. So people with mental health issues, homeless people, that's all criminalized, but it's caused from something that's material that's going on. It's not going to the root of the problem. We were talking about not necessarily holding a single person accountable, but the system accountable. But then again, the system is working just exactly as it is. It's not, it's never going to be able to be held accountable. It's really hard to sum all this up. What were we all talking about? So we were also talking about, like as a solve to punishment is like bringing back the possibility for accountability to a community, so that the community can hold that person accountable. And I think those were the main points. I could go on. It was getting really good. I'm so mad it fucking ended. That's my main point.
So again, these are just the beginnings of conversations that we will continue to have with each other, but we should also have in our other communities. Christina, can you go?
So we agreed that an ideal society would be one where one is brought up with care and social structures that create inequalities don't exist at all. So in that, punishment doesn't help us achieve that world. If anything, it can perpetuate those systems. So then we started discussing the idea of justice and what it looks like when it's not punishment. So is it providing resources for healing? Is it whatever the victim of harm wants it to be? Is it community-led or decided by the community? And how do we install justice and reparation without replicating systems of power and without replicating biases and privileges and systems of oppression? And how do we make a justice system that, I guess, is community-led and isn't punitive and it isn't influenced by privilege or doesn't further, it doesn't further create oppression.
Brilliant. So it sounds like people mostly kind of had the same kind of feelings about that punishment is not conducive to the world that we want to live in, how to address harm, what the impulse for revenge is versus what we actually want. Yeah, I think that's really good. Something that people talked about, I think in all the groups, maybe, I don't know if they use the language of it, but transformative justice. Maybe we can talk a bit more about this another time, but I think actually it might have been like a further reading, or it was a podcast with Mariam Kaba. She talks a bit about transformative justice, but I think thinking about beyond restorative justice, but like how we actually transform our communities. And something that we also talked about was that the identities of survivor of harm and perpetrator of harm are not static, and that we can be both at the same time. And so punishment is not always the most helpful framework when we think that we're always kind of like interacting with each other and like being harmed and causing harm. How do we be accountable? Just one last point on that. So Ruthie Gilmore, who also poses these questions, has said, this isn't an exact quote or anything, but that the society we want to bring into being won't come into being through a better system of punishment. Punishment leads people to the conclusion that you deal with the problem by killing it, right? So you disappear it. But killing it is not actually dealing with it, right? And it's creating, this is the thing, is that it's actually perpetuating more harm. It doesn't fix anything. So then maybe we can start to look towards restorative justice as a way of trying to heal and fix those things. Right. So we've gone through a lot of stuff today. I hope people are feeling sort of more confident about abolition. Like, I think this is the thing. When you first start reading about it, because it does sound radical, and it's, someone was like, oh, I sound like such an idealist, but actually that's the fucking point, right? Like, the point is that we, instead of talking about the world that could be, we actually are working towards the world as it could be, like, we do believe that it can be like that, and we're working towards it instead of writing it off as just like idealism. Like, we should be thinking about our ideal and working towards it every day. Like, that's the whole point. So yeah, let's keep thinking about what abolition looks like. Does anyone, we have about 5 minutes. Does anyone have any specific questions that they want to ask? I think if you do, just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask. So here's the other thing. I don't necessarily have all the answers. MERJ members don't necessarily have all the answers. We've been at abolition from the beginning of MERJ, which was 2017, and we're still, having questions and coming together and talking about how we deal with things, right? So it's an ongoing process. It's really important to remember. You should hopefully start to feel more confident about, this political imagination of what is abolition. And hopefully you'll start to feel more confident in articulating this kind of vision. One thing, if nobody has any questions right now, but one thing that did come up a couple times was, when we're trying to figure out what to do, remembering that there are already models for some of the things. We don't necessarily have to start from scratch. As was mentioned, there are communities for whom calling the police is not an option. And so we can look to those communities for how they deal with it, how they deal with harm. And there's a really good resource. We can send it to you. It's very big and it's like 500 pages. So we're not going to like use it as one of our main resources, but we can list it for y'all. It's called creativeinterventions.org. Basically, it's like a oral history storytelling project where people went into communities who can't use police for different reasons and kind of came up with some solutions, talked to them about like how they deal with harm and accountability, and then created a toolkit for ways that all of us can like implement some of these ideas so that we're not all starting from scratch. And that like really realizing that there are loads of non-carceral solutions that we use every day to deal with harm. And yeah, being more confident in ourselves and trusting ourselves a bit more. Any specific questions? Y'all are real quiet. Maybe you're just very tired after 2 hours. I don't know. So this is just, I guess, the end. Just say thanks. Like, thanks for everyone for participating and having really amazing conversations. Thanks for being open to having these conversations and really creating community, which is rare these days. And really, I would like to say thanks to everyone in MERJ for continuing this work and really pushing this work forward. And there's loads of admin work and stuff to just get everything set up. Thanks to Nicole for coming up with the readings and the videos for everyone. They're very helpful, and I think that they worked really well with today's topic. And thanks to Alba for moderating the Blue Jeans thing, and thanks to all the facilitators for doing the prep work, and thanks to all the participants for, participating, but also for taking the time to read the stuff and to think about the stuff and everything. Also, thanks so much for the feedback from last time, because that was really helpful for us planning this time. So we'll probably send a feedback thing again. If you could take a couple minutes to do that, it would be really helpful, and give ideas for sort of things that you might want to see in future. We were talking about maybe in future tackling some of these things more specifically. Yeah. Any other questions? Y'all are very quiet. Makes me feel isolated and unsafe. No, I don't feel unsafe. But I feel like maybe there are more things that you might want to say. So please feel free to say it over the feedback. Oh, is there someone who wants to talk?
I think it was me.
Okay.
Just wanted to say that I'll make sure that the form includes specific topics, like what specific topics people want to see, so that we can consider what specific things we're going to go into. I just want to say thank you to you, Emily, for facilitating.
Yeah, thanks, y'all. Like, this is really, it's super exciting for me to be able to talk about abolition and people to know what I'm talking about, because it's been a really long journey. And yeah, I'm really excited about continuing these conversations. I think they're really important, and I think they can be really transformative, not just in terms of like specifically as it relates to prison or direct provision or, policing, but also how it relates to like organizing in our communities, and tearing down racial capitalism and the state, and building something beautiful in its like a phoenix rising from the ashes. Anyway, all right, thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Thank you, everyone.